My name is Wyatt Muse. I'm a fourth-generation farmer from Monticello, Illinois. Feel like I'm kind of the odd man out here, that these guys have good experience and likely a lot more experience with managing financial risk. So I'm still very much in the learning mode. I do have full-time employment at Clarkson Grain, so know some folks here because of that. I've been working in the grain industry for 11 years, working in the organic grain industry for 8 years, just finished 8th harvest. And through those experiences, I've found the confidence to start transitioning some ground of my own. So between my own and a partner, we have 240 acres in transition. And learning through how to make all of that work and balance time and priorities and finances. So I'm excited to continue to learn from these guys. I've known Jack and Dave for years and have been fortunate to be able to pick up some tidbits so that I am less likely to stub my toe quite so bad as we ride this learning curve.
I think one mic's enough for me. I'm Jack Erisman. I started farming in 1963, so everybody start counting backwards. I converted to organic in 1990, cold turkey 2,000 acres. Don't do it. That's not the way to do it. But we learned and we haven't forgotten some of the things. I'm an experimenter. We also work with livestock. We've transitioned some of our row crop ground to permanent pasture. We do grass finish. On the beef, we've also had hogs in the mix at different times, but not consistently. And I'm looking forward to when we can manage organic production systems no-till. That's our big challenge.
Well, I'm Dave Bishop. I'm the local guy here. This is my hometown. We're just located a couple miles south of here. We have 400 acres. We raise row crops, corn, soybeans, wheats, oats, legumes, about 35 acres of vegetable crops, pork, beef, and eggs, and honey. So if you want to talk about managing risk, I would say diversity is the best insurance policy you will ever buy. And when we think back at some of the tougher years, like 2012, we had a drought here. Our pastures burned up in June in that year, and we didn't have any rain then until October. If it had not been for the combination of animals and plants together, we would have lost a lot of money. But because you had animals, because you had cover crops, because you had small grains with cover crops, you had a nice fresh pasture coming on about the middle of July. And then you had a corn crop. We had a field in the bottom that had no ears on it, which would be a crop failure if you're a grain farmer. But if you're raising grass-finished beef, it's a bonanza, right? You've got a whole new grazing system there. And so we were able to utilize crops that would have otherwise been a failure because you have this combination of plants and animals. And you're not entirely beholden to the grain prices if you have livestock. If you take it one step farther and you do develop direct markets, then you have a much more stable marketing platform to work from, and that is incredibly important in managing risk, just achieving stability in the price. So that's kind of where we are right now. I started in 1979, so I'm a newcomer, Jack, relatively speaking. But we've seen, of course, an awful lot of things changing. We didn't certify until 2004. At that point, it looked like it made sense in terms of, I believe corn, conventional corn was $2.25, and organic corn was $4.35 that year. And I had $100 an acre less crop expense. That was my rationale for doing that. And we've never looked back. Well, we had, as we started, like I said, in 1979, and we had an established relationship with the bank in a conventional agriculture context at that point. And we didn't scare them too bad. We tried not to, over worry them. And we transitioned gradually. We tried to transition what we felt we could manage, or not to take more risk than you could afford to take. Although it's very hard to know what that means in any given year. But we did try to manage the risk in such a way that we would be acceptable to the bank. And they were just nice people, and they tolerated us, even though I think there was some reservations as to whether this was a smart thing to do. But if you have an established credit, that's one thing. If you're coming into it completely new, it's a whole different story.
So I have an incredible amount of startup costs that I'm incurring, as anyone that's going through this can imagine. That you look at a farm and how much equipment's out there, and what it takes to to get a crop in the ground and harvested and handled, and that's a big undertaking. And reliability is a big deal, especially with organic production systems. That timeliness is really important. Something's broken down for 2 days, then that window is really serious. So try to be focused on having good equipment, but also try to be frugal in that you can't just go out and buy a line of brand new equipment and expect that it's going to flow. So I haven't had any issues getting financing, but I think it's because at this point my farm is not supporting my family. My off-farm income is supporting my family, and we're able to funnel funds into the farm. I have chosen to work with 2 lending institutions intentionally. I have a little bit longer-term relationship with one guy that I think of him more as an advisor than anything, but I only borrow capital money from him for equipment purchases. And then I have an operating line at another bank. One thing I've found with doing that is that it keeps both of them competitive on their rates. And it seems like from talking to other people on operating lines that I've been able to secure cheaper financing, knowing that there's 2 banks competing for each other. So sorry, Richard, I don't know how that how that all works, but that is the way that I've approached that. And the other thing, it keeps some discipline in there and keeps you away from the temptation of commingling operating funds for capital purchases. If I keep those strictly independent, I feel like it gives me an added layer of discipline.
My situation's a little bit different because I was farming for several years before I started to do the organic. I started working with sustainable concepts as early as 1969. I haven't used anything like anhydrous ammonia or an insecticide since then, 1969. So I spent 20 years working up to organic almost, if you really want to look at it that way. And then we took the plunge. But I wasn't going to get anybody to loan me money or to loan me operating capital to take this plunge to organic. I mean, that was ridiculous. I mean, my wife probably suffered from this whole concept more than anybody else because she's a very social person, meets a lot of people, and they were very firm about telling her that we were going to go broke. So she was very uncomfortable, and I think maybe the last couple of years she's finally gotten a little bit comfortable. But she asked me at the beginning, she says, "How long are we going to do this experiment?" I said, "Well, it'll take 10 years to figure out whether we can or not." And 10 years came and went, and 20 years came and went, and she still asked, "Are we going to keep experimenting?" But I do experiment. I will tell you that I purchased land in Mississippi, or options on 2,000 acres in Mississippi in the 60s. Now, if you look at relative values between Illinois farmland and Mississippi farmland, this was up in the Black Belt of Mississippi, over on the east side near Alabama. Always, it's about a third. So the investment I could get, 2 or 3 times the ground in Mississippi that I could buy in Illinois for the same money. I thought that was good. It was something I wanted to develop. So I worked with that over a period of years. The other thing you need to look at is historical values when you're looking at investing in capital, your capital operation, your land basically. From 47 to 52 or 53, you could buy a farm and the income off the farm would pay for itself in about 3 or 4 or 5 years. From 69 to 73, that happened again. From 80, late 85, 86, early 86, there was a small window in there where it happened again. In each of those cases, Rich, the farmland went to half. If you go back and study those charts, you can see how that worked. I bought land, I was buying land, now not in the 40s, but in the 60s. I bought land in 69 that was tough to pay for because I bought it at a high price. I paid $900 an acre for some ground in 69 when, you know, by 73 it was a lot less, 450, 500. But I honored every one of those contracts. I carried $500,000 worth of debt through the 80s and serviced it. And I dug out some old paperwork a couple months ago, and I looked at an old banknote, 22% interest. And I was never in a farm program during that period of time. I've been in one farm program, 1966. Since 1990, I've never been back to the bank. I didn't go organic until I was in a financial position to do it. The land was paid for, the machinery was paid for, I didn't owe anybody anything. And then I was free to just, you know, go nuts and screw it all up. And that's what I did.
Well, being in transition, I've not yet been under the scrutiny of an inspector. I have had the privilege of seeing a lot of other people's record-keeping systems, and I think it just comes down to whatever works for you. It's up to the individual, and it has to be something that you're not going to push to the wayside. I use the Farm Logs app. It's a free app on your phone. You can take pictures, it timestamps them, you can put notes in. That seems to work for me. I know some folks that do use that for their organic record keeping. The other thing I like about that is that it timestamps it. So if you say, was that, you know, April 22nd or 25th, you know, it's on there. So that's what works for me, but if it's a notebook in your pocket that works better for the individual, I think that's the main thing.
I dug out some old records. I'm bad about not throwing anything away. You know, I have envelopes from the 70s. I have notebooks, you know, these pocket seed corn books and things like that from the 70s yet with those particular field records in them. That's the way we kept records. Going organic for me was probably a good thing because it forced me to do a better job with those records because it made me put them together, made me compile all of them. And an organic system plan, if you're working, I'm certified under EcoCert ICO out of Indiana, and they give you the discount, and I'm big on discounts. They give you the discount. I'm like collecting coupons, you know, when you go to the grocery store. You'll get, what is $75 discount or something if you're in by, I think it's February 1st. Well, in February 1st, do you know everything you're going to plant in every field? You know that? No, you don't. You don't know what's going to happen. So I made myself do it anyway. And you know, that's not a bad thing because it forces you to put something on paper and it makes you put that plan down there. But another thing that I did, and you talk about record keeping, but this is also record planning. I projected rotations for the next 20 years when I first started this. And just last year, I projected another 15 years when we wanted to change some pasture rotations for grass-fed cattle. So, and I always put it in a holistic setting where all the fields of all the farms are included in it. So, yeah, we keep records, but you know, I've tried to do it on the computer and I'm not fast. I'm quicker with a pencil and a notebook or a big spiral notebook. And I keep all those kinds of records that way, and it works out pretty well.
I'd rather take a beating than do book work, but you have to. There just isn't any way around that, I'm afraid. That's one of those things you simply have to do, or you don't know where you are if you don't really have good records. We do the combination of things. There are some records the computer has helped a lot, especially if it's repetitive type things. We also keep notebooks handy, and we kind of journal, I guess, on a day-to-day basis. If we're out in the field a lot, we'll write down every day what we did, you know, what we planted, where we planted, how many, what population, what soil conditions were, and just jot that down and then come back. And if I'm lucky, I'll re-enter it somewhere. If I'm not lucky, I give them the journal and hope they can read it. But if you don't have that information, you're going to have a tough time with the organic program because they're going to make you do something to do that. And you really are going to find yourself coming back to that years later or the next year in particular, even for things like, well, what drill setting did I use?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff there that you really just need to have a record of. So I still don't enjoy it after all these years, but I still do it because I don't really see any way around it.
Well, yeah, I will too. I keep a daily journal. I really do. I get one of those calendars where you have a week at a time, you know, and you just keep flipping the pages. But I try to put down everything we did that was a function on the farm and in the shop, whatever, for that day. If I sold something, I put it in green ink. That's income. If I have a particular appointment that's really important and something I want to remember, that's in red. If I bought something, that's in blue ink. If it's just fundamental stuff where we fixed the corner post on field M36 or something, that's just in pencil. So I've got a little code for myself that kind of speeds up the process, but I can reconstruct stuff back into the 70s.
I'm going to touch on calendars for a second because Jack's comment about writing down when things are done is interesting. The Land Connection has a calendar that's, am I saying it right, Kara? Farmer annotated calendar that has, well, in the past, the Land Connection has had a calendar, and that template could be something good to use for yourself and something that you can just have a reminder if you're planning out your weeks ahead of time. The other thing I was going to say, in our notebooks today, there was a 12-month cash flow projection sheet, and my lender advisor has really pushed on that. And over the last year, I've really started to see the value of that, and I'd encourage anyone to take a look at it because that's pretty important when you think about it. And I was just talking to Jack out in the hall a little bit ago about this, and I'm experiencing something I didn't expect, that I've got wet beans in a bin. Who's ever heard of beans being too high of moisture until this year? Usually they're, 9% and trying to get moisture back in them, but they have to be 13% for delivery, and this weather is not allowing them to dry. It's not a drying bin because they're beans, and so there's substantial cash flow change that was supposed to happen for me in December, and now it's going to be February, and those are things that, we'll work through, but being able to note that and write it down will help me plan for the future and be able to communicate that.
That's one of the things you can do with iPhones that are kind of handy. Just take pictures of a lot of things. So sometimes the organic standards want you to keep your seed tags. Well, maybe by the time your inspection comes around, you can find those seed tags or not. We take a picture of it. If we are happy with a drill setting or a setting on a plant or something, we take a picture of it. We can use the iPhone, and then we keep those records in a loose leaf notebook or a 3-ring binder. And we add the field maps and all the measurements and all the data that we can find. We stick it in that book one way or another. And then at some point in time when you have time to sit down, you can kind of reorganize all that stuff. But iPhones are actually pretty handy for keeping records of various things.
I don't need an iPhone. My men have iPhones. Years ago, I didn't have a wristwatch. They had the time. They knew when it was time to quit. Not always when it was time to come to work, but when it was time to quit.
Well, the inspector will have to have access to your records. And they all come with a laptop when they come here. So it's usually not all that hard. I don't know, what's your experience?
As someone mentioned, it's all about the individual inspector. Even if, EcoCert might have 20 inspectors and each of them are going to have different experiences, and some are more interested in looking at the physical land. Some don't really say, okay, looks like you have a thick notebook, you've got plenty there, let's go see the field. And some of them don't step foot in the field, but they comb over the documents. So I know that's not an answer, it's just an example of a broad range, but I think if you're documenting everything that you do, that's all you can do.
Go ahead. You had more?
I just want to make one other. A lot of it revolves around making sure things make sense in your bookkeeping. If you got 20 acres of corn and you sold 50,000 bushels of corn last year, somebody's bound to ask you, how you did that. Just making sure everything makes sense.
Yeah, you can talk about that.
Yeah, actually, I think that's going to become a bigger deal in the future. There's been a lot of discussion about the imported grains and the legitimacy, and as we see continued price discrepancy between organic and conventional, there are some concerns out there about the legitimacy. So I think that we're going to see more transaction certificates required in the future. If your equipment has yield monitors, I mean, that's a great way. If you can download yield maps out of your combine, that's fantastic. But being able to track that and documenting, in the grain side, they call it a mass balance. The bushels in need to match the bushels out minus the measurement of what's in the bin. That's pretty simple. It's not quite as straightforward with row crop or animal production or vegetable production, but especially in a mixed operation, if you have some conventional ground, some organic ground, absolutely documenting everything that you can. And I mean, even as silly as it is, even as extreme as taking pictures of, the field as you pull into it and the bin before you put anything into it, certainly doesn't hurt if things come in question.
We made fun of the iPhone thing, but where our cattle are concerned, we use a particular tagging system. Heifer's left ear, males are in the right ear. The bull is on the top of the tag. The mother, the grandmother, the great grandmother. We got all that into the tagging system. And if they take a picture of that with the iPhone when that cow has a calf, we've got all that history right there. And so the iPhone really is, that's a good deal. And I'm out there with I forgot a pen, and I'll write it on my hand or in the dust or something like that. But they've got the picture. So that works out pretty well. I'll tell you a little story about an inspector a couple of years ago. And he's a seasoned inspector for EcoCert. And he chided me. And you're asking about how many records you need to have and all this kind of thing and how you need to have them. And he was really going to be right. I mean, he was going to be tough. And he let me know that up front. And I didn't have all my tags in the house. I usually have everything. I've got all my bills of lading and things that I bought, and seed and things that we sold, settlement sheets, the whole deal. But he wanted to see the seed tags. I said, well, I don't have them all here. Well, you're supposed to have them all here, right now. And I said, I'll tell you something. I can get seed tags from anywhere. My sacks are out in the shop. You can go see them. He says, I never thought of that. He says, I learned something today. But you can get seed tags from any place and just put them in a file, whether you used them or not, and make it look good. I showed him the bags, and he could count the bags of seed and the whole deal. And he changed his tune. Interesting.
Now remember, though, you got those seed tags. You also have to have some receipts to show you bought that.
Right.
So there's a lot of ways to start cross-checking. So if you want to get into that war with your certifier or your inspector, just give them a reason. to start wondering if you're up to something, and they can dig pretty deep and make your life pretty miserable. You got all that stuff laid out in advance as you're supposed to. You don't give them a reason to go digging around so deep. So, it's kind of common sense.
We had an interesting thing happen, but once again, I'm an experimenter. I want to learn new things. I want to try stuff. So I got Bill Davison, some of you know that name, gave me a bag of open pollinated corn. What was the name of it?
Rebellion.
Rebellion, thank you. Gave me some Rebellion. He said, Jack, would you plant this? I said, sure. And it was an untagged bag, just a plain brown bag. And we planted it. And of course, it wasn't on the organic system plan. It wasn't something we planned to do. We just got it, the week or two before corn planting time. We went ahead and planted it. That was a hang-up for this inspector. We couldn't find the bag because it looked like every other bag, and we sell oats to chicken people and people who have some livestock and stuff like that, and we probably used it and just bagged it up. But when my employee told him the same thing that I told him, then he was fine. But we had nothing to back it up, but everything else was square. And he was just very concerned whether or not it was, GMO or if that really happened or all that kind of stuff. So we're not into the financial range here all that much, but it's a lot of it's just procedure.
So I started filing Schedule F income in 2006, so coming upon 10 years, and haven't had a lot of need for a government program until recently. Most of that in the past had been hay, some cattle, and this year I'm doing some of my first FSA enrollments, or this past year, and part of that's with the pollinator habitat. I've benefited from that. That's a great program for anybody that's considering it. We were talking at the table about the buffer strips and how that can be another one for your field setbacks. If you have a required setback for your organic crop anyway, and you can border out your field and get a government payment on it, it's a pretty good deal. I mean, depending on your soil types, you can be up in the $300 an acre range for that over 10 years. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but those are some examples of programs that I have participated in.
Yeah, conservation practices make really good ways to buffer organic fields. We use some CP33, but there's a CP42 out now, which is specifically designed for pollinator benefits. And those are really good ways to buffer the farm. You could cheat the system, with the CP42, because honey is about the only profitable crop that you can grow on a conservation practice and get away with it. Mm-hmm. And so, utilize these things as best you can. A lot of waterway rebuild. I mean, there's all kinds of different government programs that we can use, everything from fixing waterways to buffering the farms to you name it. We have a stream that goes through the farm, and so we create buffers on both sides of that. And those are just good uses, I think, of conservation practice.
I think it really depends on what you're doing, I mean, apple farm is completely different than a corn farm, or if you're in dairying or something like that, I think it completely changes that. And so I guess to speak from the row crop standpoint, we've got 240 acres in transition. I have another 600 acres of conventional row crops, and then my partner, who has a lot more age and experience on him, has about 1,700. So when we're looking at a line of equipment, that's covering 2,500 acres. It's going to be a while before I can justify owning a late model combine, just based on size. And so if you can partner on some of those things, that to me makes a lot of sense and keeps your debt burden in check. So I don't know that there is a specific size that drives efficiency. If you're trying to do it all yourself and not share any equipment, then of course more scale means more more acres and more dollars to support that equipment. Or if you're a really good mechanic and you can get by with an older line of equipment that's going to cost you less at the upfront cost, but might be a little more maintenance, then you can get by covering less acres. So I can't say that there's a one-size-fits-all answer on that.
It's the old rules. It's economy of scale and then cost-benefit ratio when you make those decisions. So that you can make a great living on 2 acres if you got the right stuff. So it's all different. It's across the board, and you look at your scale. You look at what you're able to manage, and when you're looking at that, and in every case, you're also looking at labor. Where's the skill level? The other thing is you're looking at yourself. What can you handle? What's your management capability? And when it comes to organic and a lot of the specialty stuff, what do you really like? Because it's a bitch if you don't like it. I mean, it's
There's a lot of easier ways to make a living.
it can really be tough if it's something that you just really don't like. So it's the old story. If you find something that you like, you're pretty good at it, then you apply all those things. What is economy of scale? What is the cost-benefit ratio if I get this piece of equipment? Or I hire the extra person. Will that person produce enough to pay for him or herself? Plus, give me the added benefit of the extra production. Those are hard and fast rules for any size. And so you have to figure that out for yourself. Very different for dairy, very different for all livestock. We wholesale an awful lot of grass-fed beef to people who have built up clientele, but they don't have enough pasture base or animal base to take care of their burgeoning business. So we take care of them. And that works for us. We're not dealing with all the individual sales then. People are coming and getting 3 or 4 animals at a time. And I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that because we have the numbers and we have the scale. And I don't go to the ASCS, FSA office. There's a little bit of hubris here maybe. I'm sorry, and you can nail me for it, but if I was going to be successful at this, I wanted to do it without even when I wasn't organic. I just really got ticked off in the 60s when I was leaving 80 acres of clover out, and then they'd take it out of my normal crop acres. I wasn't part of the problem, I was part of the solution, and I got fined for it. I thought, this is a hell of a way to run a country. That was just wrong. That was a backwards way to control the program. And then they're looking for conservation a few years later. What are we doing wrong here? It was misapplied. So I got out of the habit, and I'm close enough to the end. I don't want to ruin my record. Sorry, and that's no disrespect to anybody that administers programs or anything like that. But it's a little bit disconcerting when your dad bought a chisel plow in 1942, and then they started paying people to use a chisel plow on bean ground in the 1970s. You're in a different position, so you need to...
Can I just go back to your question for a moment? We'll have about a dozen full-time employees on a 400-acre farm, most of which are involved in the 27 acres of vegetable crops. But by having the larger farm, by having the diversity, the other enterprises, we can better utilize that labor on a daily basis. You can spread them where they're most needed. Now, having said that, 4 of them are interns. All right? Interns are not profit centers. Inexperienced people operating around farm machinery is what's called a high-risk enterprise. So you have to be extremely careful, of how you utilize that and how profitable that becomes. Another thought, maybe a little bit off the subject, was I'm hearing people talking about grain farms and livestock farms. Right? There's kind of I think, a basic rule for sustainable agriculture is that you can't raise plants without animals, and you can't raise animals without plants, and do so without synthetic inputs. So we need to start thinking of farms as entities where animals and plants operate together, rather than I'm a grain farmer, I'm a cattle rancher. I think that's part of the thought process that allows you to make this kind of transition and do it successfully. 'Cause a lot of it has to do with how you think about things. Well, I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I can tell you what I do. We store, and we have a dialogue very frequently with our crop. We have 3 basic resources that we might sell to, and so we try to keep up with those folks to see what the opportunities look like. And we also utilize a fair amount of that crop ourselves, and so we want to keep enough on hand so that if we want to expand our livestock, that we have additional. And having livestock and being set up to do that gives you the flexibility. When crop prices, when grain prices start to go down, you can shift more of that production to livestock if that's more profitable, or vice versa. When corn was $14 a bushel or whatever, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to put that in any kind of animal that could possibly drop over dead, because you just can't do better than that. But as grain prices start to go down, ideally you'll reach a point at which it will now make more sense to start shifting part of that into livestock or some other enterprise. Maybe selling complete feed off the farm sometimes makes sense. But you want to be in a position to be very flexible so that that grain is on the farm a good part of the year. I can do whatever I think will make the most money with it. We have not. And that's not because I have something against that. It's just because that has not worked in our system.
Taking corn as a classic case, I mean, the organic corn now it's the $8 range, $10 range. Just for your own opinion, is there a high point, or is there a point there where that pendulum for you would swing more to the livestock in that price spectrum between one or the other? Which is more, but that's obviously your opinion.
You have to look at what the options are. For example, if I say, well, I think I'd like to put some of that into livestock. Well, pigs. Well, all right, what's the possibility? What's pigs bringing? If I am marketing that direct, I can have a very different picture than if I'm selling it on a market. So right now, we're selling pig carcasses $2.95 a pound, carcass weight. So 300-pound pig is going to weigh 220, 210, 220 pounds, times $2.95. So you're looking at $600, let's say, for a pig. And then you have to, of course, subtract off. That's a lot of expensive feed, too. But and when corn was $14 a bushel, even that didn't really look as good as it sounds. Now, with corn at $8 a bushel, it makes perfect sense. So if I've got laying hens, I've got a good market for a wholesale market for $5 a dozen. I can calculate that. I can bump that up. I can bump that down fairly quickly. But it's just what are the options and how do I put them together?
Let me talk to that from the livestock side, where we're grass-based on the cattle. Of course, we're not putting any of that grain. We don't have that option now that we're all grass-based. And we did used to feed a lot of cattle, a lot of organic grain, and we raised a lot of oats, things like that. So that was a market for some of that. But in the cattle business, when the prices were really high, we were also selling calves. And then there got to be so much demand for grass-fed beef, grass-finished beef, we didn't have the finishers because we sold off a pretty good bunch of our calves when the prices were good. So then we quit selling calves. And now we've got a whole bunch of grass-finished beef, and some of those customers aren't there. So, it's like an accordion, Same thing with cash grain crops. I finally finished selling 14's soybeans this past summer. We just didn't get, with the amount of imports, we didn't get the calls. The market wasn't there. Even though the market was decreasing in value, I always wait for the phone. They come to me. The phone calls come to me. I've hardly ever had to call anybody. I wait for them to come to me. And that's worked out pretty well. But you almost, sometimes you sit there past a year. And even 14's blue corn crop didn't all get marketed until this fall.
To the point of financial risk and price risk, I like to think about the accordion thought about time. You know, there's one mindset of you harvest in October and you've got until the following August to get rid of it, so that's about 10 months. You can probably stretch that out to about 24 months in that if you think about right now, most people have committed to grow a crop, whether you've bought your seed and you know exactly what you're growing or you've already made tillage or some kind of preparations. You're going to grow a crop in 2017 and have until about August of 2018 to market that to get to Jack's position where you're able to carry it multiple years. And there's multiple reasons to think about that, you know, it's a financial burden, it's a storage burden. If your bin's full of 2014 crop, you can't put 15 or 16 in that. And then there's quality risk, you know, grain especially deteriorates over time. So you have to really pay attention to be able to maintain and keep that quality. So part of the point is that if you can stretch out that time and whether you're contracting in advance or selling in the spot market, be in a position to take advantage of that. And I don't do a very good job about this. It's, you know, do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. But you know, if you're happy about a cash price, there's nothing wrong with trying to sell a little bit of next year's. It's easier to say that than it is to do that, and especially when you get into high prices and attractive pricing. You know, when organic corn was 15 a bushel, the next year's prices were 12, and people said, well, I don't want to sell it for $3 less than the cash is worth, but today I think everybody in this room would have been happy to have $12 corn. And the same applies in the conventional markets. When commodity corn was 7+, the following year was 5, and people say, well, I don't want to sell $5 corn. It's $2 less than what I'm getting now, but, you know, looking back, that looks like the right thing to do. So I guess the quick take is you can try, and that's more flat price. For what I do, I try to have everything on the grain side as some kind of an IP crop, whether that's white corn or seed beans or a non-GMO bean. Those kind of things I like to be able to contract in advance to give a little bit of discipline to not just grow it and stick it in a bin and hope.
Yeah, sometimes when you're trying to balance this, do I sell it on a truck, you spend a lot of time and effort and expense developing markets. Sometimes the question comes down to what's more expensive, to lose money or to lose market share? Because it's not going to be cheap to rebuild a market once you get it. So you have to keep the stability in mind. I've created diversity for a reason. I've got to use it so that I don't end up making a fortune this year and losing a fortune next year is not a good way to make a living. Having that diversity is so key because it allows you not only the agronomic success, but to succeed economically as well. My biggest fear going forward, and you're all seeing this expansion in organic demand, my biggest fear going forward is that we become producers of organic products. We market them in the commodities market system. In a few years, we are in exactly the same place economically that our conventional counterparts are in. And we didn't do all this to get there. So 85% of the profit in the food system accrues to those who value add and market the raw materials produced on the farm. Unless you keep them, that 85% local, in the local food system, in the community, split between producer and seller or somehow local, then you're just another version of the commodities market. of the conventional system. So organic is a production system. That when you use interconnected, cooperatively owned infrastructure, you can create a local food system. But you need to keep that 85% in the system. So we focus here about organic production. That's one half of this story. And the other half is just as important.
Marketing becomes, after you're in the game a while, and you know them, and they know you. They know where you are. They know what you do. You've developed maybe some running order or some reputation or something like that, and you might be a so-so quality supplier. You might be a really good supplier. You might be the guy of last resort. You know, we have markets like that too. You know, I won't go there because I know he's going to be cheaper than everybody else. And in this game, especially in organics at this stage of the game, it's about relationships. If you get a relationship and you've developed an integral relationship with people and they trust you, that's worth a whole bunch in this market. That's a big thing. And that's one of the reasons we do a lot of wholesaling with the livestock. There are small producers out there who have developed their market and suddenly they can't meet it. I haven't developed that, but I can keep them going. And they're helping me in the process. So that's a stair step in this whole thing. They have that personal relationship with that consumer. And then they tell me the quality. They feed that back to me. Have we done a good job? You know, were we on the right combination of grass and legume mix in the right months and that type of thing? Did we have enough finish on that steer? Those types of things. We're even building relationships with people who are working with Chicago restaurants. So that's really important. You don't have to do all the marketing yourself. You can develop these relationships with people who can help you do it. Now, the grain business is a little bit different. We worked 4 years on developing a red corn hybrid, a particular red corn hybrid for a red corn chip. And we did small plots, and then we did a little bigger, and then finally we put out 18 acres. And we didn't have a contract. We were just working on a handshake. And everybody kind of knew everybody. And when we got it all, they wanted 500 pounds. Let's do a test run. You know what? They got cold feet. Took us 2 years to get rid of that red corn. It didn't work out. But that's one. That's one that failed. We've had others that didn't, and we've done pretty well. So that relationship is important, and you maintain those contacts. If Wyatt Muse calls up, I know it's legitimate. Okay? But he'll remember one time when corn was really high. And I said, "You have any corn, Jack?" Corn was short.
Corn was short.
Corn was short.
Jack's not the cheap supplier. He's the high-priced supplier, but he's always got it. So.
I had a bunch of corn, and it was at the end of the season. I said, "Why?" He said, "Will you sell for this price?" I said, "Yeah, I'll sell you a load at that price, but the next one's going to be a little higher. And then the one after that's going to be a little higher." And he says, "I understand."
Yeah. That's a true story.
And he hasn't called back since.
And next time corn is short, I'll call Jack. That is very true. Along the lines of representing your product, I know this summer I was out at Dave's. It was one of the hottest days of the year when we watched that grain separator, and he had some beans that were going to be coming. He said, "Hey, there's some cockleburrs in these beans," and that's appreciated, you know. And I think with anyone, if you're buying feed for your farm or you're selling anything off your farm, represent it for what it is, because if you misrepresent it and then it shows up, people are going to remember that, you know, regardless of which side you're on.
Yeah. Be cold, stone honest. If somebody asks you for a sample, be damn sure you get it in the right part of the bin and it's representative. Just don't stake your reputation on that one sample. Be honest about it, and people really appreciate that. That's a big difference in this game, especially in the grains.
And your financial situation? I mean, I don't know if I could possibly, can you answer that as a?
Well, yeah, what are your goals? And then what can you handle? You know, and that has to do with finances, but what you can handle might also require a conversation with your lender too. He or she might tell you what you can handle. You might think more of yourself than they, or vice versa. You can go somewhere else. We've heard today all the different places you can go. I'm amazed. Here's the state of Illinois that's broke, you know, totally broke. And man, you can get money all kinds of places. I mean, there's a certain dichotomy taking place here. I don't know what it is. And then there's the federal government. You know, how far in debt are they? And Jiminy Christmas, we got program after program. No, and I'm making fun of it, but there is a certain dichotomy here. So the farmers have an awful lot of opportunity if they want to accept it. I mean, it's out there, but you need to have a plan. And where do you want to be? You know, if somebody comes to work for me or asks for a job and they're young, they're in their 20s or maybe 30 or something, I said, one of the questions I asked, where do you want to be when you're 50? Because you probably aren't going to make a lot of changes after you're 50. I mean, if you look over everybody's life patterns, you don't make a lot of changes usually after you're 50, especially in your work life. You know, and the things that you pursue. So you'll stay down the same pattern. Same thing with if you're going organic, have a plan. You know, would I transition the whole farm? No. I'd split it at least in quarters. And then if you have different landlords, you may never get that last quarter, you know, those kinds of things. When I certified, I had 9 different landlords, and about half of them weren't in the family. No problem with the people outside the family. I had some in the family that where the problem was, so we finally got it taken care of, but it took a while. It was tough. It was really tough.
I think the main thing is what can you financially handle, and over the last couple of years I've had a shift in mindset, because if you think about the commodity agriculture world, it's all about, you know, clipping a coupon. You gotta take cash, harvest a cash crop. If you're in commercial hogs, you better be turning that barn 2.4 times a year. You're gonna go broke, and it's all about, you know, how many times can you harvest income off of that. And I think in an organic system, I've come to believe that you got to stretch that out a little bit. I'll give an example, and please anyone tell me that I'm crazy on this or correct me before I do it. We've got a field of wheat right now, and it's in transition, and I'm going to plant a frost seed clover into it, and then the thought is to forego a cash crop in 2018 and use that as a soil building year. And 5 years ago, if you had asked me that, I'd say that's crazy. Why wouldn't you just plant beans and keep doing that? But I want to get weeds in check and also build some nitrogen. And I've really started to run through the numbers, and I just did it on a notebook, and I'll probably convert it to a spreadsheet at some point, but it's a left column and a right column with each year's, and it's a what if. And I think that we can, for about $90 an acre cost, that's going out and clipping the clover, mowing it with a disc mower 3-4 times a year, and frost seeding. So you're going to have a $90 an acre loss in that 2018 crop year. But if you think about $90 an acre and then you're harvesting an organic corn crop, let's say it's worth $9 a bushel, that's 10 bushels to the acre. Are we going to gain more than 10 bushels to the acre by having good soil conditions, or you know, try to make a go of it raising soybeans and then maybe have, you know, break even on those beans, and because they're a transitional crop, you're not getting the organic premium, and then have some weed issues in that field, and then also have to go out and buy manure or an organic fertilizer to get that. So I realistically think that we can get 20 to 30 extra bushels of corn by having it go in good conditions. But Jack put out 20 years. I don't know that I have that long of a vision, but I'm thinking, you know, 3-4 years, and it is on a rented farm, and the landowner wants a cash income every year, and realistically, they're probably in a better position to weather that year than I am, but I think it's the right thing to do. So any insights or experiences people have on foregoing a cash crop, I'd be interested. So there's actually two wheat fields in the mix. One of them's mine and one of them's my farming partner's. And on his partner's ground, the homestead that's on that farm, the guy runs some cattle. He has about 15 acres, and we just had this conversation yesterday. You run a hot wire and run them in, that's great. On this other farm, the nearest home site's half-mile away. There's no water. Is it doable? Yes. I mean, that is a possibility. So yeah, when livestock are in the mix, to these guys' point, that's a wonderful diversification. And some farms you can do that on easier than others. Sure, and that's how I got started with the first step into transitions in alfalfa. And I'm a huge proponent. I still think that's the best way to transition. Clover hay, I don't know. It's kind of a lower nutrient value, maybe a break-even proposition if you're hauling it and selling it. I don't know. You guys might bale it and...
Oh, we're chopping at the bit.
We're chomping at the bit. I come up with this brilliant plan one year. I had a 40-acre field, and I had a neighbor who's a dairyman, and he wanted alfalfa. And I thought, boy, I got this made. I'm going to put that in alfalfa. He's going to come in and take that hay off of there every year for 3 years. I'm not going to lose money, and I don't have to do a thing. Why was that a really bad idea?
Yeah, took the nutrients right out of the
Don't give it away, Jack.
Oh.
Why was that a bad idea? What did I do? I exported 100% of the nutrients being grown for 3 straight years off that field. I mined. That's a mining operation. That's not farming. And then I had to replace those things, and believe me, they were more expensive to put back than they were to get off of there. So really got to think through this process and use that 2-year opportunity you have to really build soil in any way you can. Pardon me?
You couldn't get him to bring manure back.
No, are you kidding? He kept that. He knew the value of that manure.
My standard procedure for transition, and people aren't doing it now. The more people are going into organic are coming in there in transition and going right back to row crops. And my whole concept in transition, by the way, I've never bought a pound of nitrogen, of commercial nitrogen of any kind, organic or otherwise, since 1969 or since 1990, since we've been organic. We've grown it all on the farm. Now, have we always had enough? Probably not in a couple of cases. I mean, when you get a lot of rains like we had in a couple of these years, you know, some of it's going to get washed out in some of those fields if you didn't have the best clover crop ever, that type of thing. But Rich, you know, we bought another 40 acres at corners of the section, and then I traded my nieces and nephews to fill them out on 160, and I took some of their ground. But it was conventional, and it had been in soybeans, and I told my nephew, I said, this was Luke, I said, put it in oats, and he put it in oats, and then he runs a feed store also, and he had all kinds of seed left over from, you know, alsike and lespedeza and red clover and alfalfa and 3 or 4 grasses, and he just went out there and sowed it. And then I think he pastured a few calves on it. We took 1 crop of hay off of it, and when we put a blue corn crop in there, you know, when it was certifiable, the first certifiable crop, I think it was some of the best blue corn we've ever raised. I mean, so, you know, you grow your own. You basically grow your own. But when you go through transition, you have to give that soil a chance to remetabolize itself. If it's been farmed conventionally, I'll guarantee you, it's used to having had that, you know, half pint of whiskey every day. And if you quit that half pint suddenly and then don't do anything else for it to remetabolize itself, you're going to get the DTs, you know? I mean, we're talking about the same systems. We're talking about the same microbes. What's in your body's in the soil, and vice versa. So it all has to readjust itself. Now, could we do better if we imported some manure, chicken litter, things like that? Yeah, you can, but that has a cost. One of the things that put me over the top at the beginning, when I didn't know really what I was doing, my fertilizer and chemical bill had been running about $100,000 annually. So you can forego that and have some pretty poor crops before you've kind of used that up, you know, because the machinery was there and all we had to do was go through the process. But we tried to transition with row crops, and that was, you know, pretty much a disaster. But so we kind of learned over time not to do that. The other thing I did is I bankrolled every one of my landlords to get to be organic. In other words, I put all the expenses into it because I thought this was worth it. And then they paid me back as their crops came in 3 and 4 years later. Now, it worked, but I had the resources to do it, but I planned for it. And that's how we got to where we are. But I was fortunate. You know, there are as many different.
I mean, but the basic principle about
Yeah,
you're committed to.
any kind. See, we were on 50-50 leases, so crop share leases. So, you know,
Same thing, basically.
yeah, same thing. That's what we did. I mean, I just said I'll take care of the seed and whatever we put on and furnish everything until you get a crop, and then we picked up the difference.
Just a comment about thought processes. You got a field of wheat. Now, the conventional thinking would be, all right, if I put 100 units of nitrogen on this field of wheat, I'd probably get a boost, most likely, right? Depending on the weather, depending on the prices, that might pay. Or you can think about it in a whole different way. What else could I do to add income to that acre besides just putting nitrogen on it and hoping for a bigger wheat crop? What if I were to frost seed some red clover in there, and then in lieu of putting that additional nitrogen on, I double crop that with beef cows? And then I can assume, and I can pretty well be assured that if I've got a good crop of red clover, let's say, in the ground for 15 months, I'm going to generate at least 160 units of nitrogen with that for my next corn crop. Right. I'm not adding inputs that I have to pay for. I'm adding inputs that I can generate with what I have on the farm.
Sound like my dad.
Still works.
Well, he's 80.
Yeah.
He's passed, but he would have been 87. You sound like him.
But it still works. It works, and if you combine that with having your own local markets where you can keep your price stability up there, you've got a pretty good system. It's not going to be dependent on the price of inputs to the point where, you know, you got to pay the fertilizer guy what he says he wants. Well, not really. You don't. There are other ways to address those issues. And I think that's the secret to making this whole system work.
I think my biggest fear over the next 10 years is a big spike in interest rates. So people that have lived through that probably can shed some light. I hear some, 15+% interest rates.
24.
20,
22.
Today if you can borrow money at 3.5%, 4% and you're clipping 10, 12% return on your investment in farming, that makes a lot of sense. But if interest goes to 16%, all of a sudden you're losing. So that's something that I'm personally fearful and attempting to manage ahead of.
And that's why raise your own input.
Well, really, long-term return, those of you who have really studied markets over the years, long-term return on land investment has been about 4. For 60 years, 70 years, about 4%. About 4%. So that's an average that's probably going to happen in your lifetime, because that's really where it's always kind of been. And we're much more stable now than we were in the 80s in terms of Federal Reserve. The politics are a little bit different. It's perceived a little bit differently. So I really don't think you're going to have interest rates quite as high as what we had in the 70s in those years. But
If we do, I'm going to come borrow from you.
listen, I'd be glad for you to come, really. What we need more youth. I'm glad to see the younger people here. I really am. There's way more land out there that wants to be farmed in these specialty categories, organic included, than there are skilled people to do it. There's all kinds of it out there, and I hope you're very successful with your exchange or classifieds or whatever it is, where you're putting people who want land and people who need help, you know, that type of thing. So, you know, don't give up, don't give in. There's great opportunity out there. Thank you.